So I struggled a bit with how to present this message this morning because honestly, talking about these concepts using our cognitive thinking brain is antithetical. It's in opposition to the big idea of this message, which is to open our hearts to get out of our heads, get out of our skewed worldview, and to open our hearts to what is true and what God has for us, the healing that he has for us. So what I'm going to ask you to do is set an intention in your heart to listen with your heart instead of with your head to what God has for you this morning. You can virtually ignore me completely, and that will work just fine. So my name is Andrew Braum. Most of you know me. I've been here, my family and I have been here for a number of years. My education and experience is in the area of human behavior and psychology. I've studied what we do, why we do that for a long time, both in various vocations, both professionally and in my own personal spiritual journey. Currently, I work as a psychotherapist in private practice, and every day I have the great blessing of having conversations with people just like me and just like you, people who are searching for meaning, searching for their identity, searching for purpose in their lives, for relief from their unhealed emotional baggage. Pastor Robert began this series on Easter Sunday called Beginning Something Better. Christ's resurrection offers us the opportunity to begin again, to be renewed, to be reborn. Within the context of that, Robert introduced the idea of emotional baggage, these unhealed hurts, both positive and negative. You know, he was very careful throughout this series to talk about, because baggage is kind of a loaded term, right? We think negative when we think of emotional baggage, but we also receive blessings, right? Blessings from our parents, from the church, from our culture, from society. So it's not all bad or all good. But the fact is that we do carry some woundedness. We do carry some hurt. We do carry with us the scars of living a human life in a broken world, in an imperfect world. I'm going to try really hard to stay on script today. I get excited about this stuff, and I tend to go off on tangents. So at 30 minutes, someone just flag me down, would you? And we'll wrap this thing up. I'm going to try to stay on script here. So some of these unhealed hurts, this negative baggage, can distort our worldview, and it can cause us to act out of that hurt rather than out of love, rather than out of our true identity, our identity in Christ. A friend of mine once told me that he used to have this large, round, silver reflective sticker. It was like a mirror. He could look into that sticker, and he could see a reflection of his face. It was quite clear. And at the bottom of this sticker, so as not to interfere with him seeing himself clearly, the words were inscribed, "You're looking at the problem." Quite an affirmation, isn't it? Yeah. So in May, Robert and I had a conversation up here about 4 fears that often arise in the process of healing this negative emotional baggage that isolates us, and the courage it takes to overcome those fears, to heal those fears. We talked about 3 areas, but didn't have time for the 4th. So this morning I'm going to expand on the first one. We're going to touch base at 2nd and 3rd, and then I'm going to talk more about the 4th area of dealing with life's baggage that requires courage. So in review, the first area that we discussed is that it takes courage to identify our hurt. Much of our hurt, much of this baggage is unconscious to us. We've repressed it, it's deep within our psyche, and it's not as evident to us as maybe we think it is. Robert quoted and has quoted several times throughout this series Annie Chapman, who said, "Christ can't heal suffering that we insist isn't there." Christ can't heal suffering that we insist isn't there. We insist it's not there, that's denial. Denial is not just the river in Egypt. Denial is a function of trying to get through life without experiencing our pain, without our pain driving us, without our pain being on the surface. We all have hurts, habits, and hang-ups, as Rick Warren likes to say. It's part of the human experience. Some are more traumatic than others. Some are more damaging, more overtly damaging than others. But we all have these blind spots that keep us acting out in ways that are not aligned with who we want to be. Men and women, male and female, created in the image of our Creator. For some, this acting out of this hurt or being reactive might come in the form of a quick temper, where we say things that we don't mean. Or another, it might be a critical spirit. For another, it might be a black and white view of the world, very rigid, very uncompassionate. Maybe it's a constant state of anxiety or a drive to be successful that sacrifices the relationships, our presence in our family, the relationships with our children or our spouses or our families. Maybe it's arrogance to cover up feelings of inadequacy. Our identity can become distorted. It can be distorted and we become attached to that distortion. We lose the view of who we really are, of our true self, and we start to over-identify with that manufactured false self, that armoring that protects us. Our identity, David Benner, who's a beautiful author, he writes so clearly and so concisely, has a book titled The Gift of Being Yourself. I know others have mentioned Benner before. Eric Ressler actually suggested David Benner to me, and he's a beautiful writer. I encourage you to read this book and books like this. I encourage you to read authors, find voices that resonate with you to help you along this journey. But I want to read a passage from Benner's book. It's a little bit long, but I think it speaks very well to this idea of identity. Oh, I got a $20 bill. How about that? Happy Father's Day. That's awesome. Look at that. I'm having lunch. So, in this, Benner writes, in The Illusion of the False Self, the root of my false self was the childhood discovery that by being a good boy, I could earn love. Of course, learning how to interpret good took some time. A false self is never established overnight. However, over time, the interaction of the dynamics of my family and of my personality suggested ways of wrapping my naked and vulnerable self with successive layers of accomplishment to secure love. The problem with that was that these strategies worked. The more I accomplished, the more people seemed to like me. Consequently, I became better and better at being the little performing boy that I thought people would like. This gave me some distance from the abyss of feeling like a nobody. Even more important, it gave me a way of being not just a somebody, but somebody special. We're all special. I'm just a little bit more special than you. Tragically, however, it kept me from discovering just how likable I was without any effort to look good. And it set me up on a treadmill of performance. Securing love by generating accomplishments leaves one dependent on the potentially fickle response of others. As I look back, it seems I put a spin on this as I shifted from seeking love to seeking respect, something that I unconsciously realized made the supply of love even more secure. While love is freely given, respect is earned. My long-standing investment in being respected has been an attempt to control my environment and guarantee the sense of specialness to which I have become addicted. The bondage in my false self is the bondage of having to keep up the illusion. I am not simply an overachieving good boy. I am not my accomplishments. The things I can do or have done do not make me special. In fact, the attempt to define myself by my accomplishments is as boringly common as it gets. My compulsive pursuit of accomplishments and the respect of people who are important to me suffocates the life of my true self. It binds and inhibits my growth and restricts my freedom. It's important for me to remember that I'm a human being, not a human doing. My worth lies in who I am, not what I can do or how I am seen by others. This is the truth of my existence. Not only does it take courage to discover and uncover and reveal these hurts, some of these beliefs that we have that maybe are not true about how we navigate the world, the lens that we see the world through. But it also takes help. Often the emotional baggage is unknown to us. It's played out unconsciously through our behaviors, our values, our beliefs. But one thing is sure, our unhealed emotional baggage always impacts our relationships and can be most damaging to the most important relationships that we have. The old song, "You always hurt the one you love," is often true. not necessarily intentionally, but unconsciously. So I want to expand a little bit more on this first area of identifying our unconscious or unhealed hurts with a specific framework that I think might be helpful. It's internal family systems was a framework for looking at the personality. It was developed by Richard Schwartz, a psychologist, in the 1980s. And I found it really helpful in myself and working with other people to identify the parts of the personality that are vying for attention, that are vying for control, that are vying to be the one driving the bus. So in this framework, there are three areas. The first area are the exiles. These are the parts of our personality. Well, let me back up just a minute. You may have experienced this either yourself or heard somebody else say something like, well, part of me really wanted to go to that. Or part of me just wanted to punch that guy in the nose. But part of me was really sad about that. Even in the way that we speak, we recognize that there are parts to our personality in front of our true self, that observant self, the authentic self. So with these parts, as we begin to tune up our ability to listen, to become aware of what those parts are, we start to get some idea of what those hurts may be, those unconscious hurts. Those unconscious hurts are the exiled parts of us. Those are the parts we push down, we push to the side, maybe we externalize them, but we find a way to not feel the pain. Because the pain is, we don't want to live in pain, of course, right? So those are the exiles. Well, how do we know that the exiles are there? Well, another part of our personality is what's called the managers. Those managers are the parts of us that come up and say, well, things should be different. Well, if only that guy treated me fairly, then I would be okay. If only I had more money, then things would be okay. Well, that shouldn't be that way. Those people, all of that externalizing, that's where the judgment comes in. The criticism of others and self. Right? The lack of acceptance of objective reality. Right? We have now stepped out of ourselves and into the world of fantasy. We're trying to create a reality that is more acceptable to us. So that's one of the groups, the parts of the personality. Listen for that in your own head. Listen for that when the committee at 3 o'clock in the morning is in your head is going crazy and breaking into subcommittees and filibustering. All right? So another part of the personality, or group of parts of the personality, are the deflectors, the distractors. These are the ones that say, I'm just going to eat another bowl of ice cream. I'm just going to go and watch 4 more hours of TV. I'm just going to have another drink. I'm just going to do something else. We seek to deflect from our pain, to distract ourselves. Social media has become a growing industry of distraction and deflection, right? So we don't have to be present if we are in the fantasy world of what we think, what should happen, should be, what other people think of us. So that's kind of a framework. So I encourage you in your quiet time, and I encourage you to have quiet time. And by quiet time, I mean quiet. Not reading, not listening to music, not doing anything else, but really just to practice sitting with yourself quietly and see what happens. Do the experiment. It can be terrifying, but it can also be very informative and very helpful. So I encourage you to do that. So that's the first area, right? The first fear is identifying our hurts. We need help to do that often. The second area that we talked about that requires courage to face is the fear that we're going to be rejected. If I expose my hurt, my weaknesses, my shortcomings, my character defects, if I'm real with you, will you reject me? If you knew who I really was, here's this fear of fraud. It's the imposter complex, right? If you really knew me, you wouldn't accept me. That's a fear because you know what? We have experienced being rejected in relationship, don't we? We've all had relationships where we've been rejected, not just romantic relationships, but if someone disrespects us or dismisses us or doesn't listen to us, or we're told that we're not important at some point along the line, or maybe many points along the line, we start to listen for that. We start to hear that. We start to reinforce those beliefs that we've already established maybe long ago. That's the risk of being, there's a risk in being vulnerable. And it's important to be discerning about who we're sharing our pain with. We don't go shout it from the rooftops. That wouldn't be very smart. That wouldn't be very healthy. It wouldn't be very helpful. But we need somebody that we can be real with. We need somebody who knows us. We need somebody that we can trust. Dr. Braum is a social anthropologist who studies human behavior. And when she studied people who were living what she terms wholeheartedly, in other words, people who were emotionally and spiritually healthy, she found that the common denominator, the most dominant and predominant common denominator among them, was a willingness, even a regular practice, to be vulnerable with someone, to be raw and real with someone that they trusted, to be emotionally transparent, to expose their flaws and their foibles so that these flaws and foibles and hurts would not continue to grow in secrecy and fester and become resentment or self-criticism or judgment. But instead they're exposed, they wither in the sunlight of acceptance, compassion, connection, love, mutual recognition. And like my friend Kelly Reynolds says, if you know suffering, you know me. That's the human experience. In her book, The Gifts of Imperfection, Dr. Braum writes, however afraid we are of change, the question that we must ultimately answer is this: what's the greater risk? Letting go of what people think, or letting go of how I feel, what I believe, and who I am? Sometimes the most dangerous place, the most dangerous neighborhood that we can be in is the one between our ears. Being there alone is not always a good thing. Starting to believe what we think. Our thoughts are just thoughts. They don't have any power. They don't hold any value until we assign that value to them. And yet we're very attached to what we think. That's what we think is the truth, right? Not necessarily, is it? So the third area that courage to face our fear, that we need courage to face the fear, is this area this fear that we're too broken to heal. That somehow, this often happens with people who've experienced trauma, particularly during childhood. They take the blame for what happened, and they internalize that. They accept that blame. They're unable to process that, to really understand that no, they're not at fault for whatever that might be. And what that does is it starts to plant the seeds of shame. Now remember, shame is that belief that one is fundamentally, intrinsically wrong. Not the healthy feeling of guilt or conviction where we've done something wrong and need to correct it or make amends or apologize or clean up our side of the street. No, shame tells us that that we're so wrong, we're so broken, that there is no healing for us. We can't be healed. This is where that denial of who Christ is in our life, right, comes in. Says, nah, there's no help for you. Well, clearly that's not true, is it? But that can get deeply implanted and then play itself out in a myriad of ways throughout our lives. People who have addictions often carry heavy shame because of the terribly damaging behavior that active addiction causes. I won't go into detail explaining the neurological systems involved in the addictive process, but understand that when in active addiction, and there's more and more of this around, right? Whether it be substances, alcohol, chemicals, drugs, other things, or process addictions, whether it be pornography or gambling or food or social media or any number of things that we compulsively do to take us out of reality is by definition an addictive process. But the frontal cortex, in that process, the frontal cortex of the brain, where executive functioning takes place, that's the decision making, the ethical behavior, the emotional regulation, morals. When we're active in that addiction, this part of our brain is completely offline. You might as well just, to open up your head, take this thing out, put it in a jar beside your bed, because you ain't using it. That's why that people in active addiction, particularly with drugs and alcohol, have such reprehensible behaviors. We look at them, we say, my gosh, who in their right mind would do that? Well, somebody in their right mind wouldn't do that. That's the point. And because the brain has been hijacked by these neurological changes, that carries a heavy load of shame for us, because it's not who we are. We wouldn't behave that way. We wouldn't sacrifice our jobs, our families, our very lives if we were in our right minds. As the alcoholic once said, you might as well give me a frontal lobotomy as put a bottle in front of me. That's what happens in addiction. That's why, too, sharing each other's burdens is so important. It's the shame buster. We need each other to be reminded of who we really are, men and women created in the image of God, and who we are in Christ. We're forgiven. We're reconciled. We can be healed. That's who we are. It's also important to remember that dismantling the armor that protects the false self, it takes time. It takes time, it takes patience, perseverance, and grace. False idols don't give up easily. They don't go down without a fight. So this fourth area, the one that we didn't talk about in our earlier discussion, where we need courage, is the fear that the pain will increase if I change. That if I, in that IFS model, if I turn down the volume on my managers, my protectors, if I turn down the volume on the distractors, if I'm more present in my body, in my life, the pain, I'll be closer to that pain. That pain will increase if I get rid of those defense mechanisms, that armoring. We don't want to take the armor off, then we're exposed, right? Well, that's true. That pain might increase. I was saying to somebody earlier today that there's this saying that in growth and in development, pain is mandatory, but self-inflicted suffering is optional. That self-inflicted suffering comes with the denial, right? That comes with the trying to just keep this stuff locked away or pushed aside, or to keep ourselves so distracted that we don't have to feel that. Once we start to uncover that, this is how Christ works in us. This is how we're healed. Some of that old pain, some of those old beliefs, some of that baggage, it starts to come to the surface. This happens when we stop talking and start feeling with our hearts. As it comes to the surface, you find that that's when we're healed of it. Right? It's almost counterintuitive. Why would we want to go feel our pain if we can avoid it? Well, because if you don't feel that pain, if you don't face that pain, you're going to carry that baggage for the rest of your life. Or right up to the moment where life says, you know what? I'm giving you an opportunity to face that stuff, and you can't deny this opportunity anymore. Often that comes in the form of a broken relationship. When someone, whether it be our spouse or partner, just says, you know what? I've had enough. I can't go on. We can't go on like this. We need to do something. We need some help. Part of that, the pain of the courage it takes to face that pain and the fear that it will increase. Part of that too is our baggage is comfortable. We wear this yoke over our necks with our two, those wooden yokes with our two buckets of shame and worthlessness for our lives. We just keep adding to those things. That yoke is comfortable for a lot of us. We know what to expect. It may not be great, but at least we know what to expect. The defense mechanisms of anger, arrogance, passivity, exaggeration, blaming, avoiding, self-righteousness have served me well. We don't tolerate ambiguity well. We live in a culture that does not tolerate ambiguity well. It creates anxiety in us. If we don't know what's going to happen, then what's going to happen? If I'm living in fear, if I'm living out of a place of hurt, then any sort of exposure to the unknown or something that I can't control is going to be fearful for me. This is where we need each other. This is where we need to have a friend, have a mentor, have a counselor, a spiritual mentor, a spouse, a small group, whatever it might be, to walk through this with us, because it is difficult. It is painful. It does take courage. We want guarantees. We want to know the whole story. We want to know the outcome before we get there, sometimes even before we're willing to start. It takes courage to live in what Richard Rohr titles that liminal space. It's that gray area between 0 and 100 where most of life happens. It's hard to accept that there may not be a clear path, a right way, that the best we can do is practice being mindful and present in the moment to the best of our ability. It takes practice through prayer, meditation, intentional transparency and vulnerability to let go of our stubborn self-centeredness. A wise man, I think Einstein, once said, you can't solve a problem with the same mind that created it. It's like trying to change a flat tire from inside the car. Your intention can be fully there, but it just doesn't work. It's not necessarily a lack of intention or want or desire. We simply can't do it. We had a, time is 10:49, all right. We had a interesting experience recently. Lori and I had been talking to Rachel and Eric, and you know, it was the end of the winter, and feeling heavy and feeling just kind of ick, you know, after the winter of eating a lot of food and, you know, the holidays and just the ever-expanding waistline, and, you know, clearly my clothes are shrinking every time I wash them. And so Rachel and Eric mentioned this this food plan, this detoxing diet called the Whole30. It's kind of the flavor of the week. You may be familiar with it. And we thought, well, maybe we should do that. Maybe that'll be fine. So roughly the Whole30, 30 refers to 30 days, right? Because it's not forever. And this is what makes it palatable, tolerable, is the fact that it's 30 days. It's a finite period of time. I may not be interested in changing behaviors for a lifetime, but for 30 days, maybe I can handle that. This is too why in 12-step recovery, one of the slogans and one of the foundations of that is one day at a time. For someone who has this dependency on baggage, whether it be a process or food or whatever it might be, a lifetime is overwhelming. But 30 days or just for today, that we can handle. So in this Whole30, it's this thing where it's a detox diet, right? So for 30 days, you don't eat any sugar or artificial sweeteners except what occurs naturally in the fruit or vegetables that you're eating, right? So no sugar, okay. No grains, so no wheat, no rice, no corn syrup, no high fructose corn syrup. Try to get away from that, right? None of that either, so no grains. All right, so no sugar, no grains. Oh, and by the way, no dairy. So no cheese, no yogurt, you know, nothing good, no butter. Basically for 30 days you're eating tree bark and dirt, right? Yeah, it's only 30 days, right? Well, to be honest, it wasn't 30 days for me. It was not the Whole30, it was the Whole27. And day 28, I think we were up at the lake and just, you know, Cheez-Its. I mean, come on. I mean, come on. I mean, a man can only tolerate so much, right? But what was interesting about this was very early on in this process, days 1, 2, 3, and Eric and Rachel warned us of this. You know, they're like, you know, around day 7, day 8, you might just want to lock yourself in a cave because you're going to be unbearable, you know. But what I found immediately was it's really tuned up my awareness. You know, I don't eat great. I never have. I like snacks and stuff like that. I like sugar. No, I don't like sugar. I love sugar. I love sugar. I need sugar. I want sugar every minute. And boy, if I've had a rough day, if I'm frustrated, I need some sugar. You know, if I'm a little fatigued, give me some chips. You know, it's like, it was really interesting. It was interesting to become aware of how I responded, not just physically to the food, because you know what, I felt better not eating that stuff. I felt better physically. Emotionally, I was a wreck. Emotionally, I was like, gimme, you know. It was great for my clients. Yeah, it's wonderful. You know, the floggings will continue until morale improves, kind of thing. Yeah. So we did the experiment, right? We put ourselves in a position to feel. I put myself in a position to feel what was true, not what I thought about it. You know, my thought about it was, oh, I can handle this. I can, you know, I can manage. You know, I can manage my Cheez-It intake. Not a chance. Not a chance. You know, but more importantly, I can manage my emotions. I can manage my responses, my reactiveness. No. No. You know what it brought up for me? A feeling of scarcity. I was afraid that if I didn't eat now, if I didn't eat this, there wouldn't be enough for me somehow. That was new. That was deep for me. That was not readily apparent. That was an insight that is helpful for me. It's out of my mind. Proverbs 3, chapter 3, 5 and 6 reminds us to trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways submit to him, and he will make your path straight. Notice that it doesn't read, trust in the Lord with all your brain, your thoughts, your preconceived notions, your egocentric bias. In fact, the writer specifically states, lean not onto your own understanding. So, in closing, the theme of this series, Beginning Something Better, it's about transformation, isn't it? Transformation from a position of self-centeredness in which we are compulsively attached to the false idol of self, to Christ-centeredness, our true identity, in which we experience the world more and more through him, not by following a set of rules and regulations, do's and don'ts, that manager part, in which we measure our worth by comparing ourselves to other imperfect people. That's a losing battle. That will keep us victimized forever. But through cultivating the courage to identify the baggage, the emotional and spiritual woundedness that keeps us in bondage to ourselves, and then to seek the help that we need to heal so that we can be more present in our lives, a clearer reflection of our Christ. God offers us, I'm convinced, God offers us an opportunity. He offers us a blessing. He offers us something with every breath. A blessing, an opportunity, a chance to be more fully awake with every breath. Knock, knock. Guess who's there? Are we awake for that? I want to close with a story that a friend of mine told me. This is hard work. This is hard work, this commitment to awakening and the courage that it takes is not easy. It takes help. It takes grace. It takes God's grace, often through other people. But it takes a commitment to do some things differently, to quiet down, to stop believing everything that we think, and to start listening with our hearts. A friend of mine was in Africa, I think in Tanzania, doing some relief work. She had been there, and I believe that Tanzania is a coastal country. She was working in a village that was some miles from the coast, significant distance, 10 miles, 15 miles, something like that. And the work that they were doing in this village was very remote, very poor. I don't know what the nature of the relief work was, whether it was missionary work or some other NGO. But they had been there for some time, working primarily with the children and the women in this village. As they were getting ready to leave, the group of Americans were packing up their belongings. It was the last day, they were getting ready to leave, and the children, of course, were all around. And it was customary in this culture to give a gift of thanks when someone left. And so, kids brought up little things and things that they had made or things they had found. And one little boy approached this friend of mine, and he had in his hands seashells and a sand dollar. Now, this was not a village that was on the coast. This village was miles from the coast. There's no public transportation. There's no bicycles. There's no underground. There's no highways. There's nothing. There's nothing but walking paths. And my friend realized that this little boy had walked to the coast, had walked the sand beaches, had found these shells. And the sand dollar is very delicate. You can't jam it in a pocket and run. You have to hold that sand dollar and protect it with intention, with gentleness. This little boy had gone to the coast and come back with these valuable gifts for her. And she was astonished by this. She was astonished. She said to this little boy, it couldn't have been more than 6 or 7 years old. She said, why did you do that? Why did you go? You went all the way to the coast. You got these things. You carried them back for me. That seems like an awful lot. And and he said to her, looked at her. He said, "Oh, the long walk is part of the gift." For us, in Christ, often the long walk is part of the gift. I'll ask the band to come back up. If you would bow your heads and pray with me. Heavenly Father, Thank you for this Father's Day. Thank you for the blessing of your Son, Jesus Christ, who was always here to heal us, who was always present, who was always faithful. Lord, I pray that we might have strength and courage for the long walk. Lord, I pray that we never lose sight of who we really are, our true identity in you, who you say we are. Lord, I pray for each of us that we today can listen with our hearts, quiet our minds, and discover a little bit more of that unnecessary baggage that we carry. I pray that you would lighten our load just a little bit today as we walk in the sunshine of your love on this beautiful day. In Jesus' name, amen.